Good morning. Good morning, everyone. How you doing today? Happy Friday. Hey, so guess what? What's Jackie saying? She's saying three. Three what?
3-day weekend, but what's a weekend to a realtor?
Yeah. Andy gets a 3-day weekend. Yay, Andy. Andy's celebrating over there. Look at her. I don't. I'm going hiking tomorrow though, so. Okay, so here's the deal. We are going to talk about a fun topic. We're going to talk about the post-NAR settlement compensation conversations. How's that for a tongue twister? Let's say that a million times. Post-NAR settlement compensation conversations. Okay, so how many of you are feeling a little bit of a, like, have you been having conversations since whatever your MLS enacted it was required on the 17th of August, right? So some of us, had it way before that. But how many of you have had a little bit of difference in your conversations with your clients since then? Ashley, Jackie, okay. How many of you have had clients since then?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. I love that. So here's the thing. The thing is that, like, this is the face of the business right now. The way we're gonna talk about compensation moving forward is going to change, right? You've been talking about compensation with your sellers for a really long time, right? We've had to negotiate our own compensation with our sellers for a really long time. But if you haven't been used to having this with buyers, it can be a little bit different. And for some people I've been talking to, it feels like you're new all over again. It feels like all of a sudden there's a little bit more like, I've got to show my value. I've got to prove why I want to earn X amount of dollars for this, right? Does anyone feel that way? There's a little bit of like what are we going to do here? Okay. So I wanted to share some of my experience. I actually asked Tara to join us today. Oh my gosh, Tara, I love to see your face. It's so beautiful. She's driving to Florida today, I think. She's driving somewhere. She takes off all the time. This girl, she's got the life I want, man. She just travels all the time. I love it. But so I asked Tara to come on too, because she and I were kind of brainstorming the other day, and she's been doing something really cool in her business that has been really impactful. It's also very similar to what I'm doing in mine. So I thought maybe having a couple of people who are seeing success in this would be great. And then also to kind of just open this up for different questions, different insights, this is not a Lynea talking conversation. Okay. I want y'all to be involved in this, because I think it's really important that with these new regulations that we're really confident in explaining our value, showing our value, not explaining, but showing our value. We're really competent, not just confident, but competent in explaining how that impacts the potential impact on a buyer. We've got to be really competent in that, because the thing that really sucks, when I say it just like this, the thing that really sucks is when you're trying to talk numbers to your buyer, and you're kind of like, oh, well, if the seller doesn't pay, then it's going to be blah, 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 right? That kind of like going around in circles. It makes it kind of look like you're incompetent. We don't want to do that, okay? So Tara and I have some really good ideas for ways that are working for us. And if you want to jump in on this conversation, please do. So, no further ado, I wanted to tell you, Tara, come on. If you want to unmute yourself, we can start.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. So, Tara, why don't you tell us what you're doing? So for me, just so you know, in our MLS, buyer's agent agreements have been required since January 1st. I have been doing them in my business since 2018. So I've never had a buyer, actually I lied. I had one time a buyer did not sign a buyer's agent agreement. And that is the last time, because I wrote an offer for that buyer, and then they went and switched agents because they were unhappy because they didn't get the offer. And I was like, oh, Lynea, you learned your damn lesson. So I never did it again. Never did it.
It only takes one time, right?
Well, it takes one time. I was like, man, because it was a hard one too, because it was during a rough time. He was a down payment assistance FHA. So you know how hard we work for those during the hot market, right? And I was like, that's the last time. So I just want to be clear that this is something that we're really familiar with. And also in the Northwest MLS, we have separated buyer's agent and listing agent compensation since 2019. So it's not new for us in this market. So a lot of times, so I do have a lot of people, I'm seeing some Northwest MLS people on here. Love it. All right, you guys, let's share our wisdom with people. But I really wanted Tara to explain what she's doing because I think it's really, really, really powerful. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So much like you, I've always had a buyer's agreement signed, but it was not required. It was required to place an offer, but not to actually just take people around. So that's the big difference for me, is like getting it signed in the forefront. And I was a bit nervous. I was like, how am I going to get people to sign this piece of paper? They don't even know me, or, unless they're coming from one of my social media channels where they actually know, like, and trust me, then if they're coming in cold, they're not going to want to sign it. So I created probably a couple years ago a pretty comprehensive buyers, what's the word I'm looking for? Consultation deck of slides. So I'll get on a Zoom call with a client, and now as a part of that, I explain the whole process. It takes me a good hour to go through all of the questions on this, consultation, because I want to get to know them. I want to know what they like. I want to know, what are we looking for? What's our budget? All the questions that you would ask, right? But I do it in a slide presentation just to set me apart from people who are just asking it on the phone. So now what I've been doing since this whole NAR thing is, as part of that slideshow, and I hate that I'm in the car because I would actually just show you the slide presentation on this call if I could, but I can't pull it up on my phone. But what I do now is, as part of that presentation, I actually added an entire section of estimated closing costs, which is something I never talked about prior to this whole thing, right? Because I was like, we'll talk about that when we get to it. And you'll hear about it from your loan officer, and we'll go over it from my end as well. But now I'm putting that in the absolute forefront so that they know going into it, what is the worst case scenario of your closing costs, what it's going to be. And I add what my percentage I'm asking for is in that slide deck right then and there, so that they know if they're buying a $400,000 house and the taxes are $6,500 a year, I'm doing all of that calculation before I actually speak with them. So I can say, okay, at X percentage is what this is a fee that I work for. This is a fee that I ask for with my buyers. And I feel like they already can see my work because I'm giving this entire presentation where another buyer's agent is just going to be like, hi, yeah, what do you want to see? And okay, let me schedule it for you. And so I already feel like in that consultation, I'm showing them my value, and it has softened the blow so much. It's made it so easy, because if they can't afford it, they might go, oh my gosh, that's way more than I thought. And I was like, well, this is worst case scenario. We may be able to negotiate down from, getting some commission or some of the don't say that word, right? The bad word.
Conversation. Concession.
Even though it means the same darn thing, right? But we can't say the other C word anymore. So compensation wise, we might be able to get the seller to help us with some of these costs. And I'm a strong negotiator, so most likely we'll be able to do that. This is worst case scenario. And I will tell you, I have had zero problems having buyers sign any documents. I was really nervous about doing it, but once I thought of the strategy, I feel so confident in it now because they know what they're getting into.
Yeah. And so I do something, when she said that, I was like, oh yeah, I kind of do the same thing. So we have, our MLS has a financial calculator. And so I do this with all of our sellers, right? I run a seller's net worksheet. When we talk about selling a home, I get them an idea of what their net's going to be after all fees and costs, right? So we all do that for a seller, correct? Yeah, good. Okay, cool. So we all do that for a seller. So the same thing I do for a buyer. So on the front end, I'll tell a buyer, okay, here's your estimated closing costs. Here's all the fees that are going to be associated with it. This is the time where I'm actually presenting my different buyer packages as well. So just like I have a listing menu, I have a buyer menu, and there's different services we'll do at different levels. And then I'll ask them, if this is the package you want, this is the worst case scenario of how much out of pocket you're going to have to come in with at the end. Is this within your budget? And then they'll say yes or no. Okay, well, if no, well, here's some different options. And that's when we can start negotiating maybe different packages, or I can tell them different options. Like maybe we can get the seller to help with this a little bit. But I will tell you, like, since doing that, it's been really, really, really powerful because they can see that number at the bottom. So if their total cash out of pocket budget is, say, 10 apples, let's just say 10 apples is their total cash out of pocket budget, and the total that I'm giving them comes to 15, we have to come down 5 somehow, right? And so having that cost up front and having that conversation up front, they're so prepared right now. I actually just have a buyer closing today, and we did this in the beginning. We did this with them in the beginning, went over all of the closing costs, potential to them, and she's actually getting a credit back because they basically overpaid. But she was super, super impressed because I told her worst case scenario was going to be X, and she's actually getting a credit back. So it's like under promising, over delivering sort of thing. There we go.
It takes so much pressure off to have them know upfront what it is. It makes the conversation so easy, because when you get to that spot in your contract where like, oh my gosh, now I have to talk about how much it's going to be, and I have to explain to them, like, maybe you don't have to pay this, or maybe you will have to pay this because maybe the seller will kick some in, maybe they won't, and I'm trying to show my value as I'm giving you this contract. Totally takes the pressure off just to do it up front in your buyer consult. Is anyone else doing that?
I bet Alex is. Like, I'd be surprised if he's a no on that one, just because I
don't
know.
see anyone raising their hand.
Yeah.
One of the real big things to remember always, though, is when you're dealing with buyers, hopefully you've already ran them to a lender. So
Yep.
come to the table, you have an idea where they're at on paper, and so when the conversation takes place, you're better informed of what they can really do to perform. Lynea, one of the things I like about our Form 41C is the very last block is blank. I've had people call me to see one house. So what I do is I give them an opt-out in that, so that it's like, I explain the stuff going on, and I'm actually going to make a video is what I've decided is easiest to do. Let them see the video, do the follow-up, but I just, I explain to the person not in the room, like, we didn't make the rules, we're just stuck with this because of the new laws, but basically, I'm not allowed to show a home without having this signed by you. But I do an opt-out so that if you decide that you don't want to work with me and just want to see the one house, for example, I'm fine with that. But I definitely let the lender screen everybody so I know just how far I got to roll my sleeves up to negotiate.
Yeah. And the other thing, I was talking to a lender the other day, and I don't know if you guys are having this in your markets, but in my market, it actually kind of surprised me because I feel like we've been a little bit more used to this for a while. So we're starting to see a little bit of shifting here. So I'm kind of surprised, to be honest, but it's fine. But I had a lender talk about how they've gotten more contracts in recently, and they never got a phone call from the agent letting them know that there was going to be some seller concessions. And so like that, and the lender's like, oh, well, where is this coming from? And they didn't have the conversation with the lender up front. So like to Leon's point, make sure if you are going to start doing these things, you've got to be able to have those conversations with your lenders up front, because that is ultimately going to be a deal breaker for you if your client can't get financed. Let's be real. It's just not going to work. Alex, what's up?
Yeah, so Minnesota, where I'm from, they require that you have a written contract for representation, but it's very similar to what Tara just explained, which is like in the past, you didn't have to have that in order to show a house, but you do have to have it in order to have representation. And but personally, I got in the business in 2016, so like I've always had a buyer rep and an agency agreement with anyone. I have that consultation before I will get into a car, with a few exceptions in the past, right? Mostly for like friends, family, people who are like repeat clients, I would do that. But moving forward, that clearly won't be the case. But my buyer presentation is like 60 to 90 minutes long. It's like very thorough. It goes over like different types of financing, the differences within each of those. What makes up a mortgage payment for my first time home buyers, and even for people who are coming from out of state because the state taxes are different. How to actually shop for homes online, what happens when we're making an offer, what to expect contract to close. And the reason why I do that is I want to set the proper expectations up front with my clients so that when we're actually out there, they're not be like, what do you mean I need to come up with 1% to 2% for earnest money? What do you mean that there's, $400, $500 for an inspection cost, appraisal fees, closing costs at the closing table? What should I expect for that? By setting that expectation up front, it makes it much easier. And I do spend a little bit of time on the needs analysis in the beginning. I'm not too big on that because sometimes people's trajectories on what they want changes and they really don't know what they want until they get out there into the market. I don't really feel like our job nowadays is to find the house. It's more of the education and guiding bit of things. Of course, I'm gonna search for them, but the real thing that I'm trying to do is educate them, because if I set the table and show them the game that I want to play, I can do a good job for them. And one of the main benefits to the buyer consultations, and I say this to my clients when I'm talking to them, is as soon as you start buying a house, there's going to be 3 or 4 other people that you run into who maybe you knew were real estate agents or you didn't know they were real estate agents, and they're going to start chirping in your ear about how they would have done things differently, but they weren't in the room where it happened. I want you to know that I know what I'm talking about and I can educate you through this process, because it really puts a real cap on that sort of thing happening, right? And then when it comes to explaining agency and then compensation, I just go into the fact. I'm like, well, here's my fee. Here are some scenarios that can happen out there. One, the seller may pay all of that. They may pay all of that, right? There may be a deficiency, in which case you have an option. You can write it in the contract. You can ask for additional concessions for yourself, and then you'll pay it yourself at the closing table. Or you can just straight up pay it yourself. And you would be surprised how many people will actually choose option number 3.
Yeah,
right?
that happens to me too. They're like, how much is it? I actually have people ask, what's the dollar amount difference between this and this? And so we'll calculate it. They're like, okay, that's fine. We have that.
Exactly. Like a lot of times it's like $1,500 to $3,000. And I'm like, that's like painting, 4 or 5 rooms in your house. And honestly, if the seller is paying a considerable amount of it, even before this whole thing happened, there were points in my career where I charged higher than what was common in my area. And I just explained to my buyers that this is what the seller's paying, the listing brokerage is paying. This is what you are expected to pay on top of that, plus my broker admin fee. So when you're just really transparent with people up front and you kind of lay out, if you make it like I am X percent or I am this flat fee, like that can be kind of nerve wracking. But when you present it as like, here are the options on how you can make sure those things get paid, it's a much easier conversation. And it's very rare, maybe one time a year I run into a buyer who doesn't sign, right? And it's really because they have this misinformation in their mind from what other agents have told them. And but this, if you learn how to master this properly, it's going to set you apart from the competition so well, because most agents can't explain how these things work. And I like what Joe Seaman says all the time. It's like agents are like the laziest creatures on planet Earth. So if you could really show your clients that you know what you're talking about, you can explain it in an easy to understand way, they'll sign with you. They'll sign. And those people, they won't cheat on you. They're not going to leave you. Like they understand that they had a commitment to working with you as your agent. That way you're not sitting there at the end of the day, you miss out on an offer. And like Lynea said, you had that client who one time didn't get an accepted offer. And it's like, that's not my fault, right? That's the market. But when they see you as the expert and you're their agent, it's much easier to deal with.
One thing I learned real early on in my career. So my mentor going into this business was my mother, who is still a producing agent here in Washington. So I'm super fortunate that I have that mentorship. But one thing she told me that stuck with me and fixes me to this day, she said to me, Lynea, if you can master getting a buyer's agreement signed, you're going to be a way better listing agent than most real estate agents. Because if you can master explaining to a buyer why they should sign an agreement to work with you when no one else is required to, now it's a lot easier because it's required, right? And so that's the one thing that I very learned from the beginning. And so like the thing is, like I have some YouTube videos just about to go out this week. Super excited, finally. But we got to think about it when you're talking to the consumer about it. And there's a lot of people are just asking questions right now. I have a lot of people just kind of messaging me from my local market who just want to know, because King 5 put out this big article that kind of freaked out a ton of people. And it wasn't even relevant to Seattle, by the way. It was from California and they put it out in Seattle. And so now everyone around my, which article I'm talking about, Leon, right? It was crazy. I was like, what? And so I had a couple people send it to me on Facebook to be like, hey, can you talk about this? What's going on? And so what I explained to them is the buyer's agreement is not a scary thing. It's not scary. So if you as an agent are scared of it, your buyer is also going to be scared of it. Sellers have been having to sign agreements to work with an agent since the beginning of time. You literally cannot start working with a seller until you get an agreement signed. So why is a buyer any different? The listing agreement protects the client and it protects the agent. It protects the client because up front, the client is 100% aware of what services they're going to receive, what costs they're going to be paying. And the buyer's agreement does the exact same thing. What services are they going to receive and what costs are they going to be paying? So if you start kind of thinking about it from that lens, I'm going to protect you. I want to protect you. And also, I want to protect myself. I have a business to run. I don't want to sit around here, and this is the way I explain it. I actually just got a listing agreement signed last night, and they were talking about the listing agreement or the listing fee and the buyer fee. And they said, why would I pay a buyer's agent? Buyer's agents, and their actual thought was, do buyer's agents work as hard as you? That's what they said. And so I said, well, I have to be honest. I'm not other buyer's agents, but here's what I do for my buyers. So I can tell you that I'm a big proponent for a buyer's agent, because if a buyer comes to us unrepresented, it's going to put even more work on us, on me, and it's actually going to not help me protect you as well. So there's a lot of ways that I explain that. So, but just know that that's a legitimate seller. And I'm in a market where where this has been, it hasn't been like the buyer's agent and seller's agent commission have been separated for so long, and we've been negotiating as listing agents. We've been negotiating buyer's agent commission for a long time, and now it's like even more. They're like, why would I do that? So as buyer's agents, we have to really show ourselves. We really have to show our value. So someone asked me about my buyer's services menu. I don't share mine because I just don't, because it is very personal to me. But here, if you want to set a buyer's agent menu, what I would say is this. Start with brainstorming, okay? Brainstorm everything that you do for a buyer. And then start calculating your hourly worth for some of those things, okay? Because I do think that you should have an hourly rate that you are trying to achieve. That's why we're here. That's about what running a business is all about. And if you have a set flat fee for every single person, if you have a flat rate for every person, and you do some more things for one person and less for another, then is it fair? I don't know. That's for you to answer. That's not for me to answer. But that's what I would encourage you to do. Because like some buyers, they're going to be it's really easy. They're going to want a cookie cutter, really easy thing to find, right? They're going to want, it's a really easy transaction. It's going to be easy. There's not going to be a lot of anything, right? You're not going to have to do a lot of extra services. But like some buyer's agents will go out and door knock neighborhoods to try to find a home in a neighborhood. Some buyer's agents will send out mailers to neighborhoods. If a buyer has a very specific house that they want in a neighborhood, some agents will send out mailers and they'll do cold calling. Is that the same? Is it the same are you going to do the same thing for someone who doesn't need that? Are you going to charge the same for someone who doesn't need that? So that's what I would say. If you want to think about a buyer's agent like services option, that's what I would do. Start thinking about the different things that you do for certain buyers. And then you got to, how much is that to you? What's the impact on your bottom line? So there's the answer. Because someone asked if I would share mine. I don't share mine. But
you could actually just Google buyer agent responsibilities, create the graphs on that side, and then put what you do versus them. And when you're showing that I don't want to say overloading, but you have what I call minimum players in the game. And I always joke when I say, and even though it ain't a joke, when I say they need a different block on who they're representing. Because on ours it says buyer, seller, both, or neither. And at that point, when you say know your worth and what you're putting out there. The other thing on buyers, because you and I, Lynea, we get a lot of buyers that are sellers hiding as buyers. So the other thing is you have the conversation about money. They show them that this extra fee, instead of putting X amount down against your house, anything over 20%, it really doesn't matter for the PMI, but you have the funds available. It's going to be there. Your payment is not impacted that much. And with me negotiating what it is, if I'm getting you the house at market value, below market value, I'm just getting a hell of a deal. I more than sat there and showed my worth and earned my worth. And at that point, I tell people you get what you pay for. So that's how you bring them to the plate.
Yep. I love it. Love it. Lots of good ideas, lots of good conversation going on. I really appreciate everyone's insight here. Does this help? Does this help somebody? Is there some a little bit more clarity, a little bit more something around this? Okay. Here's what I would say overall is just get really confident about your worth and your services as a buyer's agent. Okay. But even on the listing side now, you're going to have to step up your game when it comes to negotiating. If you're going to negotiate a buyer's agent compensation for your sellers, just like I ran into yesterday, you've got to step up the game on how you're negotiating with your sellers now. Because like I said, I mean, it's really easy for me to say, okay, cool. No, you don't have to pay a buyer's agent. That's just the easy way out. But do I really feel like agents should not have a compensation and the agents should put their business at risk? No, I don't. Why? Because I support real estate agents. I want real estate agents to be successful because we help each other out. And so I really don't think that not paying a buyer's agent is in anyone's best interest. But that's not for me to decide. That's not my decision to make until I'm selling my own house, which I will be next year. So then I can make that decision. But for my... Go ahead.
Sorry, Lynea, I was just going to say when sellers, because it hasn't started happening in my market yet where they're like, well, why, I don't want to pay anyone because they're not as, I think they're not as tuned into the NAR as you guys are on the West Coast, It's big news, but it's not as big news here. But it starts to say that it's like anything that you market in the world. You want an incentive to buy, right? You want an incentive to have people coming to your property. Without that compensation, I'm getting confused with the C's, but without that compensation off of the buyer's agent, are many people gonna see your property as would see it if you had a compensation that you were willing to choose? Most likely not. People want incentives because it's going to be more difficult for people. Because I think it's a shame that it's all put on the buyer, right? Because the buyer already has the title fees, the closing costs, their down money. In Pennsylvania, we have transfer tax, which is 1% of the actual purchase price. So there's all these fees that cost so much money, and then they're supposed to come up with like thousands and thousands of dollars more. You want to incentivize them to come. So it's an important conversation on the seller side too, like Lynea was saying.
Yeah. And I would say the thing that I work with people a lot, if you are in any of my coaching, that I teach you how to be a better storyteller. So if you can learn the art if you can master the art of telling stories and using stories to help you get the result and help your clients get the best result for themselves, you're not going to have a problem with this. So,
and you only need one set of stories because you're going to be telling that same story to all the sellers, right? So come up with a good scenario, like think of it like this, and then come up with your story. And that's the same story you're going to tell all of your sellers, and you're going to get really, really comfortable with it. And they're going to be like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense.
Yep.
I just explained to my sellers that the only person that's really coming with money to the closing table is the buyer anyways.
Yep.
So if they're including their fee, that's just part of the transaction overall. It's just an essential way for them to roll that compensation into the financing, right? And if you have that conversation with the sellers up front, I see a lot of head nodding when I say that to the seller because you're just planting those little seeds in their mind of a different way to really look at it in the perspective. And it's the same conversation I have with buyers and the buyer presentation too, which is even though you might be getting a loan for 95 to 80% of the value of the property, you are still the only one bringing money to the closing table. So we're just going to be writing it into the purchase agreement, and we'll see what comes back when they negotiate it. If they say they'll only pay a portion, you might just increase the purchase price a little bit. It's up to you. You could also pay it in cash as well.
Yeah, and I think that's another really good point, Alex. And that's something that I will explain to a lot of people is that, historically, it's kind of been both parties has been responsible for all compensation. because compensation has been typically or traditionally rolled into the full purchase price, and the buyer is the one paying the full purchase price. So yes, seller comes out less net or more net, whatever, but buyer's also paying it. So it's essentially, historically, it's kind of been both parties. So I think that that's another good way to tell that story too. So, and the other point, just one more point I wanted to make is like, if, for example, a seller's not offering, this is how I tell the story. If a seller, for example, is not offering compensation, you have two houses that are exactly alike. One is offering compensation, one is not. A buyer might look at the one that is not offering compensation as X% less value than the other one. So really, they're going to come in with maybe a lower offer on that one. See what I'm trying to say? So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. So I hope this conversation was valuable. I know that if you have any questions or you want to kind of talk through any of this, let me know. You are part of my Facebook group and you're welcome to post questions in there. And I will talk to you all next week.
If you'd like more information or to get connected to the Agent Power Huddle, join our free Facebook group. This call was designed for the agents in our EXP organization, but open to any agent from any brokerage. If you're a guest and you're interested in learning more about EXP or our specific resources within the Agent Collective, reach out to the person who invited you to this call to get more info. Produced by the Agent Collective Media Network.